So the theory says that the formation of hot Jupiters would disturb the formation of rocky planets due to the migration. However, the richest system of stars with various planets is 55 CNC, with 5 planets and 1 in the habitable zone. And it has a quasi-Jupiter at 0.111 AU of distance from the star. How does this fit with the theory?
Okay. Well,
First of all, it's rare for these hot Jupiters to have planetary companions. It's found that there's a correlation between one planet and another planet. That doesn't hold true for hot Jupiters. And that's both from Kepler and radial velocity. There are exceptions. You have also Upsilon and Andromedae. But they're pretty rare. And you can have things migrating inward. They would disrupt any planets that were there beforehand. But it doesn't mean on occasion something can come in, especially if they get there early. There could still be a possibility of formation of the planets outside them later on, or migration from greater distances to distances just somewhat outside. So I think that's the most likely possibility.
Okay. No comments? So the next one. In the article of Kwon et al. 2003, Interstellar Glycine, then there's the reference here, the author mentions the existence of glycine in interstellar medium. However, 10 years later, there hadn't been any other paper mentioning or confirming the existence of glycine. What are the factors that make the detection of these macromolecules difficult? And is there any kind of factor that can stop the appearance of these molecules in space?
Okay, I'll take that one. You guys want to step in?
I certainly do.
Okay, so glycine is the simplest amino acid, right? So if you want to talk about finding, quote, like biological molecules in space, it sure as heck would be nice to find, one that's very central to biology, right? Or one of the players in biology is not necessarily central. The issue with big molecules is they're very floppy. What do I mean by that? That is, if you take a molecule take CO, it only has, a handful of transitions that are accessible at an energy of 10, 20, 30, 40 Kelvin. So only a handful of energy states that are accessible. So for any given energy state, you have, a lot of population to emit. Now, if you have a big floppy molecule, like glycine, it can do this, it can do that, it can do all kinds of motions, internal as well as rotating and vibrating, with the same energy that CO has. So for the same amount of energy, you're sharing it over a wide range of motions. So what does that mean? Any given emission line from that floppy molecule will be significantly weaker than for the same amount of energy given to a simpler molecule such as CO. Right. That's the challenge of detecting big things in space. In the case of that particular detection, it was very interesting idea. What they did is they had a bunch of different lines of glycine that were detected, or they claimed to detect, from a bunch of several different telescopes. Now, when you look actually at the emission of glycine, so they modeled it and said there's X amount there. if you actually look at what that X amount was and predicted the rest of the spectrum of glycine, including lines that they did not observe, there were other data sets that already had been out there that would have detected that molecule already. And so I guess what I'm saying is that there were lines not in their data set that should have been emissive in other data sets that already were published. So that was not a detection. And the refutation of that paper was published actually by the former thesis advisor of the person who wrote the paper. So it was his, yes, there's amazing familial battle behind that, which I could spend 20 minutes on, but I'm not. But you can ask me about it. Lawsuits, the whole deal. Yeah, over beer. Anyways, so it's very hard to detect these things. Now, the other thing is, if you have lots of complex molecules in space and they're all emitting from the same area, that means you might get this huge line forest of very weak emission that's very hard to disentangle. And so the way to do it is you got to find the things that you know are there, make sure you characterize that spectrum, and then keep working your way down to try to find these other things that will be harder to find.
Can I follow up on that?
Yep.
So from the astrochemistry point of view, which is
Oh, that
your
was
field-
another part of the question, I'm sorry.
No, well, I was going to go a bit more generic.
Yeah.
From the astrochemistry point of view, the path to astrobiology is going into more and more complex molecules.
I don't know the answer to that because I like to be grounded a little bit. Well, I don't know if everybody would agree that I like to be grounded, but I like to be grounded in observations as much as I can. And so I can't tell you that. I can tell you that we don't see things that complex that we can identify. But of course, there are these unidentified infrared bands. There's the diffuse interstellar bands. There's some sort of carbonaceous material of intermediate length that we can't identify that are there. Okay, so the answer is yes. Apparently, it can happen, but we haven't identified what the various carriers are. Yeah, so I think it's there, but probably at a low level. And I think a bigger effect is the larger abundances of smaller molecules that get implanted into the ices and then converted to more complex things. Those are the things that have the deuterium enrichments that are being carried into the ices that we observe.
And if I may,
Sure.
if I may generalize, then what is for the rest, the three of you, what would be the path on, what is it that you work on, the path to astrobiology? Because astrobiology is still a theory of putting your fields together. But what?
Well, from my perspective, okay. So I work in the solar system primarily, but I'm also interested in exoplanet atmospheres, and I've been part of Mars missions to Mars, and of course, there's two ways to find life outside the Earth. It could be in the solar system, right? And what bodies could have life in the solar system? Well, there's Mars. It's maybe not life today. If so, only in the subsurface, which is not hard to access. But we could look for past life on Mars. And then there are the bodies in farther out in the solar system. Ceres, there is a possibility of subsurface water on Ceres, or maybe water on the surface in the past that has hydrated minerals, and that's the largest asteroid. And then the moons. So there's Europa, that's probably one of the best candidates, with an ocean twice the volume of the Earth's probably. Maybe, Mario might get interested if there's fish there, and doing strange sex in particular.
They do.
Usually they do, okay.
It's very dark in that ocean.
So there's not much to do.
Very cold too.
So there's Europa, there's also Ganymede and Callisto, which there's evidence that they probably have subsurface oceans. And then around Saturn, there's obviously Enceladus, which is a target for astrobiology because it's spurting out streams of particles from its south pole, and thought to have a subsurface sea beneath the south pole. And there's the detection of organic molecules in that stream of particles. So maybe there's life on Enceladus. There's also Titan, which there's evidence that it has a subsurface ocean, and there's all these organic molecules on the surface. And then farther out, there's Triton around Neptune. There's even Pluto, possibly has a subsurface ocean. It'll be quite deep. So there's lots of bodies in the solar system that could have life, although not necessarily very accessible. So the big step in astrobiology is there's still a possibility that life could be discovered elsewhere in the solar system through exploration. And then the other thing of great interest, of course, for planetary atmospheres is finding so-called biosignatures, so signs of life in the atmospheres of other planets. That's one way to look for life. And of course, there are people who are still listening with radio telescopes to pick up transmissions of civilizations, but so far nobody's made themselves known to us. But from my own, I don't do research in that area, but from my own perspective, it's life in the solar system for the bodies I just mentioned, or in the future, which will involve big space telescopes looking for life in atmospheres. Yeah.
Down the three topics I would like to approach, so I don't forget. I forgot the third one.
If I continue one more on that line, because there was a question, I'm pretty sure, if chlorophyll is something that could be detected, I don't know exactly what the question
I'll
was.
swap my microphone. Does this work?
No, you have to turn it on.
This one's fine.
Okay, I'll go back to this one. I'll talk about the possibility of detecting chlorophyll tomorrow. It's actually in my lecture tomorrow, but it does have a distinctive, when you look at the Earth, it does have a distinctive character to its spectrum, a so-called red edge, but I'll discuss that tomorrow. Of course, whether that kind of pigment would exist on another planet is a question, whether it would have the same biochemistry or not.
All right, I obviously have a very different perspective on things, being the only person here who is not aware. Huh?
The only one that works in this planet?
No, I'm the only one who is not aware of the practical difficulties in doing things that I think would be interesting to do. Like, oh yeah, just send a rocket to Mars, things like that. But I think there are three things that I see as possible windows for a new era in astrobiology that are within our reach, more or less. As a biologist, I would like to see, without actually giving too much space for science fiction. I think this was mentioned already, but I'll just put a different name to it: a paleontological expedition to Mars. I mean, it has to be done. If there is life there, it left traces somewhere. There are sedimentary basins, there are remains of river basins there, and things like that. So if there is life there, the traces are somewhere. But we actually, I mean, if you land on the Earth and look for fossils, you're not going to find it right away, right? It's going to take a while. It's not something you stumble upon all over. So you have to go to the right place, be lucky. But of course, you can make informed guesses about where to start. Like sedimentary basins would be a great place to start. But you need to be able to move around the planet, at least within a certain range, to be able to actually look for fossils like paleontologists look for fossils on Earth. Many people ask me, I've worked a little bit on fossils, although that's not my main work. Oh, how do you look for fossils? How do you do an expedition looking for fossils? How deep is a hole to look for fossils? And there's no hole, you just walk about, kick things, and eventually find something. It's as simple as that. There is no hole. Sometimes you have a layer that you lift, and then you look inside, and then you lift another layer. It really doesn't need much equipment. It's pretty much a matter of walking around with an open eye and look for things that look promising. So that could be done by a manned expedition to Mars. With a robot, it gets a little more difficult, but it could also be done if the fossils are abundant. So I think that would be great, because if you find something, it doesn't need to be anything special, just anything that will change everything. Yeah. If you find a little bit, one fossilized bacteria that is unquestionably a bacteria or something like that, that's enough to change our psychological expectations forever. So I think that would be very promising. Another thing, I mean, that's one a little further from science fiction or from large sums of money, would be more experiments on how far can bacteria go in terms of their evolution through space-like conditions. Because bacteria can be selected for many things, many extreme things of temperature, conditions of all sorts. And they actually evolve in real time. You can see them evolving, and you actually see that they can live now in things, in medium that they could not live yesterday. So how far can we go with that? Experimental conditions, just exposing to radiation, generation to high temperatures, to ionizing radiation, and see how far can you carry that in terms of selection. Because they are already pretty tough for most of these conditions, but you can still certainly carry that along a little more. So how far can that go? And finally, this is something not for my specialty to do, of course, but I have always been very curious about how much we know about the behavior of potential macromolecules in extreme conditions. Like how would an atom of magnesium behave in an ocean of liquid helium? Or something like that in the various pressures. Does it change? Can you expect something different to happen? Or do we know the physics of that? Because then we might expect life to originate in conditions that are radically different from the ones we know on Earth. Otherwise, we don't expect anything simply because the structures cannot be built. But if there are other structures that can be built in extreme conditions, and I don't know if much is known about the behavior of molecules in extreme conditions. And just another day I read a paper saying that glass, common glass, when it gets really close to absolute zero, it becomes liquid again, as if it was very hot. That's quite interesting, isn't it? So we can be surprised about even simple physical properties of things. Yeah.
And what about a different kind of experiment? Let's say sending Earth bacteria to Mars or something. Is
That's too dangerous, yeah, because there is no way back.
Consideration about that?
No, I wouldn't do that. No, because we don't know what is there. There may be things we don't know. If we contaminate it, it will be too late. No, that has to be done in the lab. I would hate to see a Martian ecosystem destroyed by nasty Earth bacteria. They can do, maybe, who knows? They will survive anywhere. So they will survive on Mars in certain conditions.
How we could evolve and
evolve?
I don't know.
No, you have to simulate. You have to simulate conditions. Maybe in space, in a space lab or something like that. But it has to be simulated. I would never risk contamination.
We may have already done it, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it may have been done already.
And if you send astronauts there, you will contaminate it.
That's true.
That is
It's
true.
much worse than the imperfectly sterilized spacecraft.
Yeah, someone dies and is buried there. This is it. We'll never know what was there before.
Let's
Yeah,
scratch that idea.
there are risks, huh?
Let's scratch that idea of manned paleontology to Mars.
Well, but they think about sending people there anyway, right? So they might as well do some paleontology. So this
If you're going to send people
curiosity.
there.
Now they're spreading the fever.
So these are the ways I think I would like to see if I could live long enough to witness the development of astrobiology. Some things that could be done more or less easily. I don't know.
So first I want to comment on one of the key things that Mario said, and I want to just tell you my view is a bit more restrictive. And it leads to that my thinking of the least interesting place in the universe we could just find extraterrestrial life is in the outer solar system. If we saw bacteria, signs of bacteria on Mars, it would make a lot of press. Scientifically, it wouldn't be that exciting. If we brought something back, analyzed it, and found it was not our cousins, that's a huge deal. That's the real profound difference. Because Earth and Mars exchange spit all the time, especially in the early solar system when there was much more bombardment. And there's much less exchange of spit between Earth and the small bodies in the outer solar system, but there still is some. So you still wouldn't be sure. With Mars, you can point it back and you can see if it's a second genesis or if it's our cousins. And if it's our cousins, is it one of the three domains or is it a deeper cousin? With interstellar, life outside our solar system, interstellar panspermia is much more difficult. And frankly, regardless of whether there's interstellar panspermia or not, either that it means if there's life out there, then either there is interstellar panspermia or life originated separately. In either case, life is likely to be common in our galaxy. But just finding it in another place in our solar system, unless we can demonstrate a second genesis, I don't think really helps that question, helps address that question. In terms of my work, it's really trying to characterize the abundance and properties of planets and habitable abodes. And you'll see how we're getting close to planets we think are relevant with Kepler in my talk tomorrow, and that's my observational side, but my theoretical half on planet formation, what are the likely compositions. And really we are using both of those together because aside from hydrogen, helium, big planets, which couldn't be anything else just because they're so low density for their sizes, we're getting our understanding, our estimates of composition by, which includes theoretical models of planet formation that say you're not going to get a lead planet with a hydrogen atmosphere and nothing else. And I go way back, and my foundations are largely in theory, and my advisor always told me, never believe an observation until it's been confirmed theoretically. Don't trust, in contrast to Ted's view, don't trust sense data.
Of course, we're in the area of a hazy area of speculation and personal feelings, but as far as I don't know, the general impact is concerned, I think just finding a bacterial life on Mars, even if it was phylogenetically related to Earth, would be a tremendous discovery. Like people would say, oh, life is everywhere, and it's in Mars too. Whether or not it is related to us, it's a question that would be most interesting to me or you. But for the general public, and in terms of of further research or resources into the field, it's there. That's all we need. It's there. I mean, as long as it was not contamination. If it was contamination, it would be a big disaster, actually. Oh, it's just one bacteria that someone left there. After billions of dollars. Yeah, but that could be easily checked. I mean, not with fossils, but with living bacteria, that could be checked easily. Yeah.
Okay, so following up on that line, what would be universal laws of biology? Natural selection, sexual selection, photosynthesis?
Natural selection. That's the first one. I think that would apply anywhere. Yeah. Photosynthesis is not even on Earth. Yeah. We have photosynthesis on Earth, but we have all other sources of energy too. Things that don't rely on photosynthesis, so I don't think that would be very universal. Although it's probably common because it's such an obvious source of energy in most places. But natural selection, I think, is the mathematical principle of life. It's I think if you have certain conditions that allow for the formation of macromolecules and things like that, life is a mathematical certainty. It will just happen if you have stable enough conditions. I mean, we have some conditions that have to be met. Of course, I don't expect to find life in the sun. Simply, there is not the conditions for the molecules to form are not there. It's just too disorganized. But other than for these cases, I think it would be everywhere. And if it's stars, natural selection just out of the stars. It's just universal.
This brings up the question of what is life. So, you know, what is it that we're looking for exactly? And if you're saying that the universal law is natural selection, obviously you're assuming that life has to have a genome. That's part of the definition of life.
Yes.
But people also talk about having metabolism of some sort, self-sustaining. You go bear.
I would never go there. No. Never go there.
You don't
Viruses are alive, yes.
But you're an outlier, I think, on that, because most people don't think of viruses as alive.
No, I think most people would if they thought, right?
Okay, well, why don't...
It's just if you find a viral particle on Mars, you wouldn't conclude that that was life. I mean...
Well, if it's a virus, it has to have some
No, that one.
host.
Just let's say you could see it. An impression in a rock, which is a virus like a bacteriophage with the legs and everything. I mean, that's incredible. Life was there, yes. It would be unequivocal evidence.
A biomarker, but not necessarily life, I mean.
Well, like for fossil, life was there.
Yeah, but I mean, if you have feces.
Yeah, are feces life? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of bacteria in them, but...
That's life, yeah, that's life. Anything that can replicate, make copies of itself is life for me.
But viruses can't do that. They have to infect a host.
That's okay. What's the problem? We depend on other life too. We don't live without our life. We eat other things that are alive as well. We depend on bacteria. Nothing is independent. Independent metabolism doesn't exist.
Maybe
it always depends on
it's
something.
difficult to. It may avoid the word life. It's better to talk on living systems.
That's fine with me. Yeah. But my definition of life is very simple.
Is, so philosophical. I don't know. It's difficult.
Oh yeah, it has a It has a.
What is your definition of life then?
It's anything that can make copies of itself. That's it.
But crystals do that.
No, they don't. They form independently of each other. They don't leave descendants. They don't make copies of themselves.
And,
Copies, no. I mean, prions are not life for me.
Why?
But before you say like
Don't
anything,
they make copies?
they don't make copies. They take another protein like themselves and distort them. So they're not making copies of themselves. They're actually distorting other proteins just to make them in the same shape that they are. But so I think prions are not life. Okay. But beyond that, all we call life is life.
What about fires?
Fire?
Fire, yeah. Embers can make new fires.
It's not a copy of the first fire.
Yeah.
Each fire is
It's
unique.
different.
Yeah.
It's not replicating itself.
Yeah.
I think it's replicating here, but
Oh, what are you talking about? What is this talking about? I have to know the objects first.
Jack is saying that a fire can make another fire, can make another fire. Like it sort of reproduces in its own way, but it doesn't have a genome or anything.
yeah, I understand.
I think the key thing is it doesn't have a genome, right? It doesn't have that hereditary information.
Oh, that's implied in the copy. But if you find a molecule, simple molecule that in a certain medium can make copies of itself, certain medium can be very elaborate, but a certain medium, for me, that's life. Yes.
Are computer viruses?
Yeah, your life. Yeah. Under this definition, your life. I have no problems with that. Yes. They're a very simple form of. I mean, I can say we could go for a life is anything that jumps and bites you. That's the definition of life. Most things that jump and bite are life. So I'm going as far as I can in order to have a definition that is simple enough.
But your last definition seems a little circular.
Which one?
Well, the one you just said about anything that can jump and bite.
It's certainly alive.
Basically, you're saying it's alive because I can kill it.
Well, it's alive because everybody agrees it's alive.
No,
I don't think there's
kill
anything
you.
magical. Yeah. I mean, I'm the biologist here, and I'm trying to dispel the mystical overtones of life. Life is a chemical phenomenon. We decide where we're going to put life, call the word life. So it's a matter of consensus. Most people would agree that life is something that jumps and bites and runs is alive. If you go to Mars, something comes and bites you, you'll say, yeah, it's alive. But we can get more refined than that and go a little further. And I think that's the furthest we can do and still make sense in terms of the processes involved to be things that can make copies of themselves. That's when natural selection starts. Natural selection starts, you have life. To me, that's the definition. The problem is, it's a bit contradictory, but there's a recent paper say that prions can evolve by natural selection. So even prions may be alive in that regard. I just don't understand very well how it is yet. But at least if this paper is right, even prions undergo evolution by natural selection. So very simple form of life. They don't even make copies of themselves. They just propagate some shape among proteins that are similar to themselves. So yeah, but I don't think there's any magical limit. We just set, what is worth looking for. There's a phenomenon that qualifies as the level of organization we call life. This is it.
The idea of living systems is quite interesting, because if I took you and put you in space, I mean, you wouldn't be alive for very long. So you depend upon oxygen, which is produced by cyanobacteria and plants. But virtually nothing seems to be independently. Nothing seems to be independently alive.
Yeah, very, very hard to find something that is
That's the
independent.
environment,
Yeah,
right?
you rely.
The environment
That's
is
natural
biological.
selection.
Yeah.
You rely on other things. Yeah, but that's why I think viruses are very, very much alive. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's continue on the same line. The trend for science has always been to push away wrong hypotheses, mysticisms, superstitions, etc. And it's fundamented on achieving a natural explanation of the world, which makes it completely incompatible with all religions. Even though religion is not anymore very loud at reacting by attacking physical sciences such as cosmology, cosmogony, geology, they still organize massive attacks on evolution. So the question is, what makes evolution so evil that scares religion so much?
Yes, that's mine. Yeah. Well, I had some slides on that, but I don't think it is worth making all the connections here and getting the slides going. But the general explanation for me is that over the history of knowledge, mystical knowledge has been pushed further and further by science. There was a time when fire was seen as something magical, since we talked about fire. There was a time when we were not allowed to look inside our bodies because this was considered to be a mystical realm. We shouldn't be fussing too much with it. There's nothing to understand that. It's magical how we work inside. We know all these things have very simple, not necessarily simple, but they're very material explanations today. We don't need the mystical side there. So gradually, the world has been getting further and further away from mystical explanations. And the last stronghold is ourselves, our existence. If we can show that we are just as much of a natural phenomenon as all the other species and as all the other physical phenomena, that is going to be like leaving many religions without a basis for existence, like everything is explained by something else. So we only need religion for psychological solace and perhaps an efficient spreading of moral principles, but there's nothing really mystical about it. It's just like a tool that society uses. And I don't think most religions like to see themselves as so much devoid of a higher sense, become reduced to just these practical sociological considerations. So that's why I think there is so much resistance, because the last trench of religion. It is not, but for people who don't know the subject very well, it still serves as such. I have a slide that showed a saying by St. Augustine, saying that Christians, sometimes the early Christian, like the 3rd century, Christians should be careful, because it's a pity that non-Christians have to hear just stupid things said by Christians, and that was not good for our religion, because many non-Christians know a lot about the world that Christians don't. So don't make a fool of yourselves, basically. Don't say things you don't understand. The Catholic Church seems to have understood that after so many years of bashing and so many examples. Galileo is just one of them, but there are many others. So as regards evolution, they are very realistic. They say, yeah, evolution is a good explanation, and the universe has several billion years of age, and man is part of this long chain of evolution, part of this long tree of branching with that diversification, and there's no doubt about it, and blah, 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 blah. The only thing that the church deals with is the evolution, is the spirit, is the soul. So the material body just follows the laws of evolution without any problem. So the Catholic Church is very old and is more seasoned about the progress of mankind. But many other churches, including several Christian denominations, are much younger. They haven't gone through that, so they still see things in a very immediate way. So they see evolution as a threat, because it just takes away a lot of the mysticism of our own origin, where we came from. And if you think, well, if you interpret literally, many things in the Bible are directly opposed to what we know. How come some primates, some species of primates, will make another species of primates in his own image? What is this? It wouldn't make much sense. The timing, also, if read literally, would be completely out of bounds with what we know today about the age of the Earth, and even the age of. We know a lot about our own history that extrapolates vastly 10,000 years, or 6,000 years, depending on how you read biblical times. The real problem for evolution as regards religion is the interpretation that they give to themselves, their own dogmas. Religions that survive the evolutionary paradigm are religions that are less related to the material world, like Buddhism and things like that. They can incorporate these things a little better. But literalist, fundamentalist Christians, it's completely opposed. I agree with this statement. It's completely opposed. And that's why I think evolution is picked as a main target. That's the reason. And it's also a tradition. It became a tradition. Now it's a tradition, evolution bashing. Because it's been going on for so long, since Darwin. The church was opposed to Darwin in a way that it was not opposed to Newton, that it was not opposed to any of the others. Well, Galileo was for a while, Giordano Bruno, but that was a lot earlier. So the church can be very violent, and could be very violent in the past regarding such things. But when Darwin came, he was also very much in antagonism with many of the dogmas of the church. There are debates between Darwin and, well, not Darwin, but his defenders and people of the clergy, a public debate. So it has always been seen as a threat. So I think that's the reason. It's a social threat.
One question, Bruno.
So you said about the problem with science and church, and you said about Giordano Bruno. So the religion said sometimes, God made us, okay, it's finished. But if we now that we have Gaia, Kepler, and a lot of technique for find life in another planet, I would like to make this question. If we find life in another planet, what you think that church will say about this?
It will say God made it. There is not much else to say as far as church is concerned. It's okay, life is there, it's always fine. They're already saying it. When you talk to religious people who are interested in science, extraterrestrial life is perfectly acceptable according to our dogma, no problem.
And they love Jesus.
They will love Jesus too. We should go there. We should go there and teach them Christianity. Yeah, it's more people. I mean, when the New World was found, things like that. It was not expected, and they went there and they did what they did. So I think it wouldn't change a thing. Really, I don't think it would. It just it might even get crazier. As a matter of fact.
Well, people have thought about this for a while. I mean, if you go back to the 1700s and 1600s, religious people like Johannes Kepler argued that there was life on planets in the solar system, and some of them argued they thought it would be wasteful if God didn't populate all of these planets, or some of them, with life. So there's always ways to incorporate scientific findings within a religious perspective, and there are astronomers in Vatican Observatory, right? I mean, they're interested in this subject, and they certainly accommodate it.
There are evolutionary biologists who are also religious,
right?
Yeah. So it's possible to accommodate the two ideas in the same brain. No doubt about it. Our brains can accommodate contradictory ideas.
Actually, Ramachandran has it's just a fast note. Ramachandran has a very interesting experiment. The person who invented the dead limb syndrome, people that lost their arms and they still feel pain, he developed this mirror. He's a very famous neuro psychologist, and he actually, in some experiments, they divided with corpus callosum and asked the different hemispheres, do you believe in God? And one hemisphere said yes, and the other one said no. It's quite interesting, but that's another topic. So
may I think that on the topic, I think that Pope Francisco has said something about that if we discover aliens, intelligent aliens, and they want to be baptized, they can.
What if they want to baptize you in their religion?
Yeah, so with the liquid cause for a holy war.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind as long as it's not in liquid methane or something like that.
Liquid helium.
Titanism. Church of Titan. Okay, going back to some more concrete things. I saw some lists of identified molecules, and I imagine that not all of the molecules are formed isolated on Earth. Some radicals and ions, for example. In this case, is how astronomers identify the transitions of such molecules if there is no spectra of them.
So there's a close interplay between the astronomical community and the spectroscopic community, the more chemical physics side. And in fact, many of the people that entered this field back in the 60s and 70s, Alexander Dalgarno is one example, were actually coming from the chemical physical side. So they actually understood these things. And for the most part, they detected a line first, and there's actually, if it's a simple molecule, there's a very simple relation by which you can figure out what is the mass of the emitter with some assumptions, and then you can ask, well, is that mass consistent with X, Y, or Z? And then you go off into the lab and do it. Now today, that's not always how we're operating. Many people are going out and thinking of, what biological molecules could you create given what we see, right? So given the chemistry of what we see, what other possibilities might arise from that? Let's go get the spectra from that in the lab and go out and try and detect it in space. So that's pretty much the way it works. Now, that said, with the data that I had from Herschel, we had an unidentified line, some molecule that existed everywhere in the galaxy, and we didn't know what the hell it was. And then I'm sitting at a conference 3 years later, and someone had detected the other transition of this molecule, and it turned out to be a very simple molecule that if you sat down and figured out back of the envelope, you could have figured out exactly what it was. And so it was argon H+. I had the best spectroscopist in the world on my team, the best. They didn't know it because on the Earth, the main form of argon is 40 argon, whereas in interstellar space, it's 36. So they were looking at the wrong mass. And we could have known that 3 years ago, but someone else got a Nature paper because they made that step. So there you go.
So a follow-up on there, I think you already answered most of this question. From the astrobiological point of view, what chemical reaction or group of reactions are more subject of investigation at the present moment? Or, in other words, where is it currently the link point between astrochemistry and astrobiological subjects concerning both theoretical calculations and laboratory experiments?
All right, so the most important thing that you can point to no matter what is water, 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 water. Right? You know, you could look at all these organics. We don't have a real clue as to what was important for life that could have been provided elsewhere. But we do know that water wasn't made on our planet. All right? And so the importance of water and going at all the potential steps that lead to water, which is what people have done in the lab, but they haven't done everything, particularly the surface chemistry hasn't occurred, there's probably some areas of the surface chemistry that could be further explored. So I think that is the most direct way. And then, okay, the organics, but the organics, there's so many different avenues, and so trying to think of what's the most important one to look at is a little hard, and that's the trick. And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know water.
Okay. So there is a little, okay, there are some fast questions. I'm assuming that those questions will be fairly fast. Is there an evolutionary track for bacteria?
What is an evolutionary track? Traces?
Sure.
Yes, there are evolutionary traces of bacteria, yes. I mean, past life, yeah, past bacterial life. Yeah. Yeah, there are even people who claim to have revived bacteria inside 40 million year old amber, fossil amber. Amber gets fossilized and there are bubbles of air inside and stuff inside. And there are claims that some bacteria have been revived from there, disputed, but claims that they have been revived. So there are fossils of bacteria.
I can also add something. So the oldest evidence of life is chemical, which is the isotopes in Greenland of carbon. But then I think the next best thing is 3.5 billion year old stromatolites. So you can see them. I've actually sat down on them. They're quite comfortable. They're at a place called North Pole in Australia. And it's called North Pole because it's about the hottest place in Australia. This is Australian humor. And then there are microfossils, but those are a bit younger, and some of them don't have all the characteristics. If you just see something circular that looks like it might be a fossilized microbe, that doesn't really count. You have to have other signs, such as cell division, so you capture the cells dividing in a fossil, and maybe they're also colonial, so there are lots of them, and there's some in the Archean, but really the best ones are at the end of the Archean. The ones which are certain are relatively young, 2.55 billion years old. So the best evidence for early life are the stromatolites and also the carbon isotopes.
So the carbon isotopes are how old?
Well, the ones in Greenland are about 3.8 billion years old, but they've only got the carbon isotopes in organic carbon, or what was organic carbon, now graphite. 3.5 billion years ago, you've got carbon isotope signature in organic carbon and in carbonate, so the complementary reservoir. And that's very convincing that life was extracting carbon-12 into the organic matter and leaving the seawater carbon-12 depleted, like it does today. So the combination of the carbon isotopes at 3.5 billion years ago in limestone, plus the stromatolites, which you can see, to my mind, leaves no doubt that there was life at 3.5 billion billion years ago. The stuff in Greenland, that's good for arguments. Some people say, I don't believe it, other people say, I do believe it, and that's just opinion, because there's little data, and when you have little data, you have strong opinions.
This graphite, is it an indication of the biomass involved there, or like it was like petroleum, which was indication of a big mass of things that were growing there and eventually got deposited, or is it just like a little bit within the graphite?
Well, there are laminated layers which are interpreted as marine, so basically sediments at the bottom of the sea, and within those sediments there are little flakes of graphite which have the carbon isotope signature of organic matter and is interpreted as something that was living in the seawater and left its trace. But that's it. And the actual piece of rock is not very big, so what you see on the surface is about as big as this table in Greenland for that particular thing. Yeah.
But I mean, it's still macroscopic life, right? There's still the step from the chemistry to biology that, you're saying basically was anywhere from 2 billion years or less, right, essentially, to get to the point where you have a cell and a reproduction and all the things that we associate with the metabolism today, I suppose, right?
No, it's stromatolites.
No, the stromatolites reproducing bacteria.
That's right. But I'm not saying they're big. It's on a large scale, right? And I guess my point is that you had to get there. So this is the evidence for, basically evolved life, and there obviously were simpler stages going back.
We don't
so this
see
is
those.
Yeah, exactly. We don't see them, right? Because the samples are hard to get at.
There are very few, but the stromatolites, although they're not the best stromatolites, are 3.5 billion years
They're
old.
3.5 billion years old, yeah.
And that's the earliest date for which we have lots of well-preserved rocks, right?
Correct, yeah.
Can I comment something? You tell me if I am wrong. It's about water. Water is the only liquid that have a special behavior between 0 degrees centigrade and 40. It dilates. When we go for 4 to 0, there's a dilatation of the body. Against all. Then that means that when we have, suppose that we have lacks of nitrogen, and there is a glacial era, all these this lake will be frozen and the fish will be trapped. But if you have water, you only form an ice on the surface. Huh? The surface became solid and the fishes can swim inside the water.
Yes, you're right. The water does have these unique properties. So the fact that ice floats is unusual, and it also has a very high heat capacity, unusually, and there's lots of unique properties of water, and so.
It's not unique, but it's a fantastic one.
Well, yeah, altogether it's very special, and so when NASA has its program to look for life in the solar system, the first step is liquid water, and there's some rational arguments behind that. People argue about other forms of life that don't depend on liquid water. So for Titan, which is the only other body with liquids on the surface, these lakes of liquid methane and maybe other hydrocarbons, people have made arguments that maybe they call it weird life, is living on Titan. And there are some people doing some research on weird life and thinking about whether it might be possible. But I think it's a long shot. I think looking for liquid water is still should be the main objective.
Well, that's right. Just following up, the first, I think it was remarked by, it was Jack or Mario, how much is invested in finding out the properties of different chemicals at minus 200 degrees, to know if something similar to water is there or not.
Yeah, I would love to I would love to hear the answer to that from a physical scientist. I have no idea. I mean, how much people are working on testing different things under extreme conditions of temperature, pressure, and combinations to see how molecules behave. Sometimes we can be surprised, right?
I know that, you know, if you take the other potential liquids and you take the organic molecules in the way life uses, life is today, it doesn't operate. So you have to try and think differently. And so I don't know. I know that there are creative people out there trying to find other DNA bases, right? DNA bases that were perhaps tried and left behind. So I'm sure that there are other people thinking of chemicals that might operate, but I mean, there's good reasons for water.
There are papers in the literature that argue about different forms of life. For example, silicon. Who was it who talked about that? Was it somebody talked about? Oh, you did. Yeah, which definitely doesn't work on Earth for various chemical reasons that were mentioned in Ted's lecture. But if you have a solvent at very low temperature, then people have talked about silicon molecules being more stable at those temperatures, unlike they are at Earth temperatures. So there is a small literature on that. Regarding the, say, Titan, a lot of our knowledge of those kind of things comes from the petroleum industry, who like to compress hydrocarbons to high pressure and store them and so on. So they've provided a lot of data, but of course there are big gaps and things we don't know. And even to try to model this in a simulation, a computer simulation, if you try it, you suddenly realize, we don't know the numbers to put in this model. No one's ever measured it. And a lot of physical scientists will say, well, this molecule looks a bit like this molecule. Let's use the same numbers. And they make stuff up and put it in their models to do something. Otherwise, they can't do anything. But there's a lot of lab work that does need to be done on these very basic physical properties. In my own lab, the Phoenix Mars lander found these weird salts on Mars called perchlorates. So you know chloride, which is Cl minus. A perchlorate is ClO4 minus. It's as far as you can go in oxidizing the chlorine. But there's actually not a massive literature on those salts, what happens to them at Mars temperatures. And we found when we took a solution of certain perchlorates, which people have talked about on Mars, magnesium perchlorate and calcium perchlorate, that if you have a salt like sodium chloride in water and you cool it down, it stays liquid until minus 21 degrees Celsius. And then you have ice and the salt, the dry salt form, which is called the eutectic point. And that's why we put sodium chloride on the roads in cold places, like where I live in the winter, to depress the freezing point to minus 21. Well, we thought the same thing would happen with these perchlorates. So we cooled them down, but it just got thicker and thicker, like molasses, or in British English, treacle, and thicker and thicker and thicker, and it formed a glass, and it never crystallized. And this would happen on Mars. So. But nobody knew that because no one had ever done this very simple experiment. So there are lots of simple things that could be done in laboratory chemistry relevant to other planets.
Yeah, that's the reason why I think I wouldn't be surprised if eventually life was discovered on completely different bases in things that are close to absolute zero, something like that.
Yeah, we were
get organized.
We were excited we were excited to find a glass because if you put bacteria in a substance that crystallizes, you often destroy the bacteria. But if you put it in a substance that turns into a glass, like the amber, then actually, because there are not elbows in the structure, then the life can go into suspended animation, and it's like if you've seen the movie Star Wars when they revitalize Han Solo, it's like that.
That's great fights.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it's like that. You put it in glass, and then you reheat, and the thing comes alive again. So it's good to have substances that turn into glasses to preserve life on Mars or somewhere else.
I remember some years back when there was, I don't remember, you guys certainly know which one is this, a satellite that was composed mostly of liquid helium or something like that. Which one is that? I forgot now.
What do you mean,
The surface is almost absolute zero, almost 0 Kelvin.
Well, Herschel, the coolant was basically liquid helium.
No, a moon of some planets, yeah. Many of them are close to absolute zero.
Well, wait,
but one of them,
there are no moons nearly cold enough to be
not down that low.
liquid helium.
No.
No,
But
this
I
is
remember
just-
one that was
Liquid
supposed to be liquid
nitrogen. Nitrogen can freeze out. It's solid
Triton.
and gaseous. The
Okay, and
liquid.
there was one moon that was, everybody believed would be completely static and stable. They discovered it has tremendous activity.
Yeah, Triton. That's the
Yeah,
largest
Triton.
moon of
Oh, okay.
Neptune.
And that was a surprise, right? To know of all that activity there.
I have a follow-up to an earlier question, and follow-up is addressed to Mario, but it's related to comments that a few people made. This is environments and photosynthesis as a fundamental requirement for life. And clearly it's not, that wasn't the beginning. But one of the key things in terms of searches for life is surface water. And one of the reasons surface water is considered so important is because photosynthesis seems to be so much better an energy source. And for morphologically complex, i.e. potentially intelligent life, do you see any other source of energy than photosynthesis?
Yeah, I think chemosynthesis, the creatures that live in the vents, of course they're a whole ecosystem. It's not like the fish are living out of sulfur or anything like that. They're eating the bacteria that...
But they're not a
They're not a pure ecosystem because the fish are relying on oxygen which is produced by photosynthesis at the surface. So it's not a self-contained ecosystem.
Yeah, not entirely, but which one is? Only if you take the whole Earth and then you depend on the sun. So every ecosystem is kind of open at some end. It's just, it's not completely independent of the surface. Yeah, they need oxygen, no doubt about it. Yeah, but if I say that, some chemical form of producing energy is necessary, that's a truism, right? Yeah, that would be obvious. Yeah, but when you talk about intelligent life, maybe I'm gonna make a little detour here. What do we mean by intelligence, right? Many people think we are the only intelligent things, but we have to see that we are the endpoints of a lineage of intelligent things, which are mammals in general, and vertebrates, which all have a tendency to have big brains. So we are just one extreme of that. Mammals already have big brains. We did not develop our intelligence out of nothing. Our intelligence was 90% inherited already. We just inherited it from their ancestors. And if you look at other places among metazoans, intelligence has evolved independently a few times. Like cephalopods are very intelligent, and they're invertebrates. Many squids and octopuses are very, very intelligent. When compared to things that are around them. So intelligence as a phenomenon occurs even on Earth a few times. Even with invertebrates, some fish are very intelligent, some lineages are very intelligent, and some parrots are very intelligent. So intelligence is something that pops up after a certain degree of complexity in the environment.
Yes, but you need a lot of energy for the complexity, and I don't know of any, if you're saying that chemical adaptivity is intelligent, then you can have intelligence among anaerobic bacteria, but otherwise...
No, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
As we know it, no, it wouldn't make sense. Only among more, intelligence, intelligence as we understand it usually, commonly, intelligence, not intelligence in another other way. But I'm talking about this. These animals are very intelligent. Yeah. Octopus learn by just looking. No, few animals do that. There are experiments where they give food to one octopus inside a vial, and they have to unscrew the top to eat the crab. They take a long time to discover that. The other octopus on the other side, separated by a glass, who is looking, when he gets to the glass, it will open right away. Yeah. He just look at the other one and learn by looking. There are not many animals that do that. They are very intelligent. And it's completely independent of our intelligence.
Okay, anybody said intelligence there? So, let me ask you that question that somebody did. And for you, it's not gonna be me. I'm gonna join two questions here. I'm gonna skip this part of your opinion about the SETI program. You can say this later. But what would be the hardest step for the dawn of civilizations capable of space travel? Would it be the formation of a habitable planet, the formation of DNA, multicellularity, conquering dry land, maybe something which is not in the past, but in the future of mankind? And I'll add here, or in other words, actually that's not exactly in other words, but it complements. What's your preferred explanation to the Fermi question? And for those who don't know the Fermi question, Fermi, Enrico Fermi, that I don't know exactly when, I think in the 60s or something.
No, he was dead then, so that was.
Oh, okay, so before that.
About 1950.
50, okay. He raised the question of if life is so easy to appear, if the TEDs, molecules are here, falling from the comets, the water is everywhere, the planets everywhere. So where are they? The aliens. The illegal aliens.
And let me just elaborate on that. It's the idea is that if you have interstellar, you have more than 100 billion stars in a galaxy. And even if a small fraction have life, and a small fraction of those develop intelligence, a small fraction of those have interstellar travel, and a small fraction of those are really ambitious and just keep going. But you've had billions of years, and all you need is one or two to have wanted to expand. There's plenty of time for them to have gone all over the galaxy. So why don't you have any of them? And there are all those reasons. Maybe eukaryotes are a big step, I think, because they're a lot more complex than prokaryotes.
But the question is for your preferred explanation.
Yes, but my guess, the thing, if I had to say one thing, and this is a real guess, it seems that eukaryotes are incredibly more complex than prokaryotes. I don't know, maybe you, let me go to a
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
But, yeah, so there are a lot of these steps. I just wanted to add that as one other one, which wasn't in the list, which I think is at least as important, as good a chance as the ones mentioned.
Yeah, I think we need to be very aware of the insignificance of our existence. If we were seeing 10,000 years ago, 10,000, this is nothing compared to the evolutionary time, and even less compared to astronomical time, right? We would be invisible to anybody who tried to detect us. Invisible. It's just one more monkey there eating. It's not even considered a civilization. Yeah, it's just one more monkey somewhere. Spreading. Yeah, they're not doing anything really interesting. They're using pieces of things to break. And this is it. So it's very short. There's not enough time for anything to happen really in a cosmic scale. So you're just like, and we're gone.
No,
There's not enough time to anyone to detect anything.
I would disagree with that, because if you look at where we are today, right, well, monkeys and everything, but you call us monkeys, which is good.
We are.
Yes, we are. Right now we say, we're going to look for biomarkers. What's the biomarker that we're going to use? We're going to use O2, right? How long has O2 been in our atmosphere? Billions of years. Certainly at least 1 billion years, right? So other aliens for the past 1 billion years could have been looking for our planet with the techniques that Jack described and found it, if they're there. And then the question is, well, where are they? If they had developed telescopes, which you imagine they would.
No, you're talking about life. I was
Yeah.
talking about intelligent life.
Yeah.
And
Well,
intelligence in a way that impresses.
There's technological intelligence. But the true answer to the Fermi paradox is the laws of physics. It's just really damn hard to travel space from point to point. Right? Even if you could figure out how to go to the speed of light, you would have to figure out how to stop, and you would have to figure out how not to hit a hydrogen atom on the way. And how the heck do you do that? Right? And so I think, there's all these other steps, which, intelligence and so on and so forth. but the laws of physics will have to somehow be swept aside, not exactly, but you would have to figure out something really clever to avoid most of the galaxy as you're speeding out, and have a lot more money than we have today to pay for.
Yeah, but again, the two things are related: is the vastness of the distance and the vastness of the time implied. There may be many civilizations that just don't overlap. So it's very unlikely on several dimensions.
I think if you stop and think about the possibilities, so there are probably at least three, which is one possibility is that we are alone, like life is statistically very rare, intelligent life is statistically very rare. That's one possibility, but I don't think it's correct, probably, given the sheer number of planets in the solar system. So one of the things that Kepler tells us is that on average, each star has a planet, or maybe more, something like that. And also there are plenty within the habitable zone where they could have liquid water. So I think that's one reason why I don't favor that hypothesis. Another is that there have been, and maybe there are, civilizations out there in the galaxy, but they just don't spread, because that's an assumption of the Fermi paradox, that if there's a technological civilization, they're able to spread, or they want to spread. And as Ted was just saying, there are actually serious problems in getting across space. It's not a trivial issue, and it's just pure speculation to say that problem can be solved somehow by some other civilization. So it's possible that there have been civilizations and are, but there's just the laws of physics are constraining them. And then there's the third possibility. I really hate the third possibility, but this possibility is that they know they're out there and they know we're here, but they're not revealing themselves, except to the odd person in Kansas called Doris who claims to have been abducted, and that kind of thing. So anyway, those are the possibilities. With regard to the question as what was the most difficult step in the evolution of complex life, I think there are at least, there are several, but the one Jack mentioned is correct, that only the eukaryotic cellular type, the ones with the nucleus and these organelles, the mitochondria and so on, only that cellular type has grown into three-dimensional, multicellular, large beings that can have neurons and brains. You've probably never met, and you will never meet, a talking bacterium, right? Because they're unicellular, or the best they can do is join into filaments, like filamentous cyanobacteria, just single lines of cells with a bit of differentiation. But the thing about eukaryotes is that the cells can change into liver cells, brain cells, skin cells. That's more complex than the microbes. They have a few different cellular types, but they just don't have the cellular machinery. So the eukaryotic cell evolution was very important for complex life. Multicellularity, I don't think that's a big deal once you have the right cellular type. Biologists tell me that multicellularity probably evolved multiple times. And then the other thing you need, I think, in the environment is oxygen, which means splitting water, having an organism that splits water. That's what oxygen-producing photosynthesis does. But that doesn't seem to me so remote, because there's a lot of water in the universe, probably planets with liquid water at their surface, and there'll be sunlight or starlight, and so it would be advantageous to develop that biochemistry to split water. So there could be planets with oxygen elsewhere. So I kind of favor the first idea, which is that, for the Fermi paradox, which is that there are planets out there with simple life and complex life, but it's just difficult to cross the galaxy.
Yeah, I also agree this kind of difficulty, but I will add to the one you don't like, that they know we're here, they don't want to reveal themselves. There is another one related to that, which is a little more humiliating for us. They just see us like we biologists see the things we study. We go to the field, we collect, we kill them, we study them. we're not bothered about communicating with the fish I collect. I don't care. You know? Just learn something about them, try to fit that into your knowledge, and get happy with your knowledge, and forget about them. You know? I never go back to the river just to, oh yeah, hello, how are you doing, fish? I want to teach you a few things. This doesn't exist. If they're that advanced, they'll just see us as specimens.
Well, that's an interesting point, because if you read, you mentioned Jared Diamond earlier today, and if you read his book, which is called The Third Chimpanzee, referring to humans as the third chimpanzee, he has a chapter in that book where he talks about how dangerous it is to do direct broadcasting, for us to broadcast other civilizations, say, look, we're here. Because he thinks that if they were truly advanced, they would treat us in the way that Mario said.
Or worse. Maybe delicious, like the salmon.
Yeah,
well,
like oysters.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing interesting there, but there's this little thing there which is really delicious. Just go there, collect them, and eat them. It's wonderful.
But the problem with that argument is that we're already broadcasting, right? Our radio waves have been, it's too late, so tough luck.
Military radio.
And from the point of view of SETI, you know, they argue that true technological civilization began in the 1960s with radio telescopes. That's the SETI definition of civilization, when you can detect other civilizations. And I'm fine with that. If civilization began in the 1960s, I was born in the 60s, so I agree.
There's one question.
About SETI. We've been hearing the stars for more than half a century, and some biologists think that if we discover a second life inside our solar system, it would be bad news for us, because if life appears so easily in one star, it means that it appears almost certainly in other stars also. And then if we still heard nothing from them, it might mean that there is the so-called big filter waiting for us in the future. Perhaps the Darwinian filter.
No, there are various possible filter stages, but first of all, if there's other life in the solar system, it's irrelevant unless it's a second genesis.
Yes.
And secondly, just given what we've explored, we've gone through a lot of potential filters that any life that we haven't been able to see yet would still have to go through. So it would be a negative, but it wouldn't be a very big negative. But there are filters that we have to pass through. Basically, you know, can we, who have developed this technology, prevent killing ourselves? Can we, who have developed this population density, prevent viruses and bacteria from killing us?
Well, the other thing about SETI is I'm not bothered that, you know, no signal has been found, because I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's a very, very small fraction of the galaxy has been surveyed at the moment. And but in the technology, it's like Moore's law in computer technology. The ability to do surveys with SETI keeps doubling every so often, and so
it's much faster than Moore's law. It's like faster. 8 to 9 months, because
doubles in 9
there's
months.
The technology of gathering the radio signals plus the ability to process those signals using computers.
Right, but if there's no signal heard in about 30 years, then it begins to there will begin to be somewhat bad news, because the survey will have extended to a reasonable proportion of the galaxy at that point.
And is that using the Allen array?
Well, it's just making an assumption about the rate of doubling of the observations.
So a follow-up on that question. In your opinion, based on new large telescopes, antenna surveys, and new techniques, when probably will be the extraterrestrial life detected? That guy. Is it a matter of years, decades, or centuries? Regarding the instrumentation, what is still necessary to be built for this? I'd like to add one thing here. I put here, Abraham Loeb, from Princeton, he had a paper a few years ago. He is it? Harvard, sorry. Had a paper a few years ago about piggybacking on the square kilometer array. It's a cosmology, which is built for cosmology, right? But to get radio communications on military radio communications from civilizations that were like us, I think it was 800 megahertz, something like this, and he actually estimated, if I remember correctly, it was about 100 light years. He could detect the leakage. So I'll just add this to for this question.
Yeah, I read that paper, you sent it to me, it's very interesting. Basically he said, if we were out there, we would not be visible to ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. With current means of detection, so that doesn't mean much yet. But anyway, all I can say about this question is hopes. I hope it's in the next couple of decades, or 3 decades, or something like that, so I'm still alive to witness it. Other than that, I have no idea.
I think, the point is that our strongest emissions beyond broadcast television, which is now, everything's going to cable, so we're not broadcasting as much anymore, is military radar, and that is the strongest signal that we have. And right now there's the Allen Telescope Array, which is being built. It was built initially for SETI, and then they ran out of money, and now I don't know where I think they're doing other things, right, along with SETI. But the more sensitive instrument will be the Square Kilometer Array, and that is built, entirely for astronomical purposes. And so the question is, will you point?
You killed his microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, I did. Okay. Oh, they two go together then.
No, it must have died on its own accident. Yeah. And so the Square Kilometer Array, if one gets the $1 billion+ to build that, will be even more sensitive and then able to detect these millimeter radars. And then, it'd be obvious that you pointed at the Earths that might have been hopefully found by that point. And well, he said it gets easier if you can find the Earths, but of course we're not there yet. My take on this is never.
I don't know, is the simple answer, the honest answer, but there's possibilities. So I think if there is a civilization in the galaxy, then SETI, that's making itself known, then SETI should be able to detect it within the next 50 years, based on current rates of progress, if it's there. And then there's the possibility of finding life on an exoplanet through spectra of reflected sunlight or transmission spectra of light through its atmosphere. And that could happen as early as, around 2014. It could happen in the next 5 years, because the James Webb Space Telescope, potentially, if it was really lucky, could maybe detect something. But that's the long shot. And so beyond that, it depends what space telescopes. I think detecting with ground-based telescopes is
the big
really
telescopes
difficult.
have hopes.
Well, maybe, but I think it's dependent upon space telescopes, and so that's still on the same kind of many decades time scale, unless NASA or one of the other space agencies gets lucky in the solar system and finds a nice trilobite fossil on Mars or something like that. Microfossils is
definitely make me doubt evolution.
Yeah, microfossils.
Trilobites on Mars.
Yeah, microfossils are actually difficult because they're
okay, but trilobite.
Yeah,
I would change profession.
Microfossils are difficult because they're even controversial on the Earth. So even if it does find something like microfossils, or that would be very controversial on Mars, and even biomarkers, people would think of all sorts of clever ways that you can make organic molecules that they might find. So it's still very difficult to find life in the solar system without a sample returned to Earth.
With regard,
Turn this on.
with regard to SETI, I think it could be tomorrow, it could be 50, 100 years from now. And I don't know what the probabilities are, but if we found something, it would be the most profound discovery in the history of humanity. So, you know, maybe the discovery of fire, which led to cooking of the food, which led to the encephalization. Tell that to any of your friends who insist on eating exclusively raw foods. But I think it would be so much more profound than just microfossils somewhere. And we would also, if we could get into the Encyclopedia Galactica, it would be a lot better than Wikipedia, let's put it that way.
I have a comment on that, now that you mention it, which is that, well, the problem I see with SETI is if we found a signal, could we decode it? Because there are signals from humans that we cannot decode. So, for example, there are tablets with languages from Crete from a few thousand years ago. There's one called Linear A and one called Linear B, and they were, I think, one of these languages was decoded based on place names, but the other has never been decoded. And this is from humans. It's a language by humans, and we
a few thousand years ago.
a few. Yeah, just a few thousand, and we can't. Nobody has been able, and it's been. There's lots of tablets, and we've had them for decades, and nobody knows the language. So I think the assumption that if we found some language transmission by an intelligent civilization, that we would be able to decode it. I'm not sure about that.
That's true, but the profoundness of there being intelligence out there would be.
Yeah, it would still be profound.
Yeah, the
much
impact.
bigger than just finding bacteria somewhere else.
We have sent some signals to outer space. Do you think that they will be able to decode them?
You mean
Voyager? Yeah, Voyager has some things like
I Love Lucy?
Yeah, I Love
Lucy. The whale?
I couldn't decode that myself, so.
There is another possibility that I sometimes entertain, just an exercise in imagination. Can you imagine some paleontologists working on the Precambrian, so they turn up some instrument, they're fossilized, or something like that. Something obviously not just the remains of an animal, but the remains of something, an appliance. That would be incredible. Because, I mean, if they visited the Earth at some point, they may have left junk somewhere. And this junk may have gotten fossilized. With some luck, we find it. Like we find many things fossilized there that were hard to fossilize, living things. So that would be incredible. That would be very big too, I think.
So I think since it's already 6, there are a few more questions I'm sure you can ask tomorrow. Just like to remark to Jack, I think you're a little bit optimistic in terms of Encyclopedia Galactica. We might already be in some kind of recipe book. So in any case, let's thank our speakers again.